So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody who has joined us so far. Thanks a lot for joining us. I hope that you are able to hear me right now and able to see the presentation that I'm sharing right now. Do let me know in case you're not able to hear me. I'll try to help as best as possible. So welcome for this Genesis Tech Talk evening series. We have launched about 3 or 4 years back. You're actually witnessing the 34th edition of the Genesis Tech Talk. So before we get going with the actual session, which Richard Patterson will be presenting today on a very interesting topic, Fidic versus NEC contracts, and we'll definitely hear him out pretty soon. We'll just quickly try to understand about IC a little bit more in details. And I'm quite happy to inform you all that this event has been supported by IET in tandem with IC Mumbai. So let's try to understand what more about this event itself. We have had a fantastic response to this particular event. We have had more than 270 registrations so far, and that is the profile of people who have actually joined us today, or at least registered themselves uh, uh, for actually joining us live for this session, or to receive a recorded link. So I'm really glad that we have had a fantastic response to this one. And if you look at the profile, you will find a very good mix of people who are members of IC, non-members of IC, and so on and so forth. They're close to about 15% of people who are registered. They are not affiliated with any professional institution. So I would really request each one of you to feel free to connect with me. If you are interested to associate with IC in any form, do connect with me. I'll be sharing my coordinates with each one of you towards the end of this presentation, before Richard commences his detailed discussion. So uh, moving on, I am absolutely glad to let you know that this is a very unique session we are attending today. We have people attending this particular session from across 40 different countries around the world. And I'm absolutely thrilled by the fact that we are able to connect with so many people across the globe in one go through a common platform, and that's provided by IC. I'm really proud to be a part of this, and I'm really happy that Richard Patterson is actually supporting this. So thanks a lot, Richard, for doing this and connecting so many people across the globe at a common platform. Let me just quickly briefly talk to you about IC and IC in Mumbai. IC, as you know, is Institute of Civil Engineers based out of UK. We have got some very illustrious people on the committee of Mumbai, and I'm really happy to share their names and their details over here on the slide. So we have a very strong advisory board, which is what you see on the screen right now, across very reputed organizations, globally reputed organizations like Arabs. We have Arcadis, we have people from L&T, Tata Projects, and so on and so forth. And a recent addition has been Vidya Basarkode, who comes from Rambol. She's a country director in India. So I'm really glad to share these illustrious people on the committee, who is actually the think tank of IC in Mumbai, and I'm pretty excited to be a part of this myself along with them. And we hope to build a plethora of offerings and opportunities for professionals like yourselves, civil engineers in India, to connect to IC and leverage maximum benefit out of being a member of IC and being associated with IC going forward. IC has got a worldwide presence with over 95,000 members across 162 countries, and out of those 162 countries, we already see participation from nearly people across 40 countries, which is simply phenomenally great. So I'm really glad that we are actually doing this for everyone on the call. Uh, Benefits of membership, as you see on the screen, there are multiple benefits of being a member of IC, which includes, we conduct conferences, events, and obviously conferences in the given pandemic times are difficult to conduct, but I think we are doing them remotely on a platform like Zoom, or similar in the future as well. We'll continue to engage with professionals, try to understand their professional needs and try to address those professional needs through various events and organizing conferences very similar to the one that you're witnessing right now. And I think we are doing pretty well as far as Genesis Tech Talk series is concerned. This year alone, I think this is the 8th one that we are doing starting from March this year. The other very interesting resources actually available, and feel free to connect with me in case you're interested to know more about the different platforms available for civil engineers to connect to IC and gain knowledge, gain experience, share knowledge, share experience, and connect with us through a similar kind of platform. Like-minded people are more than welcome to join us in any form and any way that they can contribute to us. Uh, in terms of memberships and qualifications, you'll see that there are different grades of memberships available, starting from student member into post. Once you're a graduate member, then you can actually become a graduate member. Then subsequently can become a full member of IC or an Eng-Tech member, and then subsequently the highest grade of membership is obviously the fellowship of IC. And there is obviously a detailed process laid down within the IC rules and regulations, which will actually enable you to work through your through the process to become a member that you desire to be. And there are mentors available within the IC itself to help you guide through the process. So IC Mumbai, what we typically do, we are trying to build a platform which connects civil engineers at a larger scale. We wish to bring in a variety of people across academics and industry all together across all levels, starting from student members to very senior members and even retired members, to help us connect across the entire spectrum of civil engineers and get them all come together at a common platform and connect with them to help us share experience, share knowledge. And Genesis Tech Talk is one such series that we have launched a few years back. And we conduct this, currently we are conducting this entirely through webinars. We used to do this previously as a face-to-face meeting as well, as you see on the picture right now. But obviously that's all halted currently, and because of the pandemic. We hope to start back once things return to normal, and we hope that that happens pretty soon, sooner than later. Thank you. Uh, Apart from Genesis Tech Talk, we have been conducting various site visits, and obviously these are also halted because of the current pandemic situation. Once things ease out, we hope to commence with some very interesting excursions. We are actually lining up a few interesting visits, and hopefully the pandemic permitting us to do that, we will actually commence that pretty soon. Uh, but the intent over here is basically to share knowledge. People who don't get to see sites, people who don't see, who primarily either are learning or academicians or people in design offices don't get the opportunity to visit sites as often as they would like to. And the idea is basically to conduct these excursions to enable people to see more sites going forward. Uh, Apart from that, earlier this year in June, on the International Women Engineers Day, we launched the Women in Engineering Initiative. This is obviously launched across India, and it's being led by Sindhu Nair, who's also a committee member. And within the Women in Engineering Initiative, we have actually launched multiple different things, and you will see the Women in Engineering Initiative very actively posting various interesting posts, which include the Monday Memoir, Wonder Women of India, which is primarily focusing on some significant achievers within the civil engineering fraternity in India, sharing their success stories and so on and so forth through multiple media channels, which include uh, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, as well as Facebook. So please follow us on any of these channels that you're comfortable following us on. And if you need any help to connect with us through these media channels, do let me know, and I'll be more than happy to connect you. So those are my coordinates. So feel free to write to me or contact me over my phone number in case you need any help to connect with me. So with that brief introduction about IC, I will now welcome Richard Patterson, who is a procurement specialist and works for Mott Macdonald to share his screen now. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I would request him to share his screen, and let's hear from Richard. Richard, over to you. If you can unmute yourself, that'd be great. I think we might actually have some audio issues, so request to you, Richard, is if you could go a little slow so that everybody will be able to hear you well.
Okay, do you have my screen, Rajesh?
Yes, can see your screen. Great.
Which
and
is
I can
great.
hear you well as well.
Okay, so can you please, Rajesh, as I said yesterday, can you take it as your job to tell me to slow down?
Sure.
Okay, because
Absolutely.
if I get too enthusiastic, I will try to speak slowly.
Fantastic.
Firstly, it's almost humbling to be on a call here to people from 40 countries around the world. Clearly, we have a subject which is, I hope, of interest to many people in the different parts of the world. And I hope this is going to be a good investment of your time. As I always say at the start of any contracts training, and I do a lot of contracts training, I've given 4 hours out of 16 hours of a training course this morning. Please ask questions, because contracts fundamentally is very dull. So questions are good. As Rajesh said, please use the chat box, and Rajesh will play the chairman and try and drip in, ask those questions when appropriate. So this is me, Richard Patterson. I have been with Mott Macdonald for only 31 years, so I'm sort of getting used to Mott Macdonald. I have been working in procurement for at least 25 years, and as you will see from my presentation, my passion is NEC. I have no apologies for that, but I also have to do a lot of work with Fidic, because I work on international contracts with Mott Macdonald. So using Fidic in those last 25 years, I have been involved with hydropower and irrigation and water supply and wastewater, mainly water, because that's my technical background. I used to be a dams engineer. And oddly, I spent 1 year actually working direct for NEC themselves. So firstly, my question for you, what do you think are the most dangerous words in the English language? That's maybe a difficult question when there's 150 people on the call. I'm going to give you the answer, okay, my answer. The most dangerous words in the English language are, we always do it this way. What we must do as engineers, as professional people, is investigate what are the alternatives for the things that we have to do. And that fundamentally is the reason for this call. And in terms of investigating alternatives, I'll start with this slide from the NEC newsletter. The International Criminal Court had to build a building in The Hague in the Netherlands. And they very, very sensibly, can you imagine, by the way, having a client for this project? The client was every country in the world, well, maybe apart from North Korea. So in this project, they had to, they made a decision. In Holland, NEC had never been used before. So the idea of using NEC in a completely new country was very radical. But what they did, they sat down and they decided what they thought they wanted their contract to do. And those are all listed on the left of the slide. And they compared the Dutch standard form with Fidic with the NEC. And clearly I wouldn't be showing you the slide if they didn't decide that NEC did all of these things better than the alternatives that were available to them. And another quote, I was very, very proud to attend the 2012 Olympics. They were delivered using NEC contracts. And one Sunday evening, I was watching a BBC TV program, and John Armitt, the leader of that organization, said on BBC television, we couldn't have done it without the NEC. At that point, I fell from my sofa and had to be helped back onto it by my family. This was quite a brave statement. And what's interesting there, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but last year the NEC was used in Peru to deliver the facilities for the South American Games just last year. So I'm going to start from the absolute beginnings. NEC. You are not allowed to call it the new engineering contract anymore because it's clearly not new. It's not just for engineering, and it's a lot more than just a contract. We'll see today that NEC is also a management tool to help you deliver your project. Now, it's well proven. I said it's not new. It goes back way back to 1985, when some people within the UK's Institution of Civil Engineers recognised that procurement and contracts were not working very well. So they started from scratch. They designed a contract from nothing, from a blank sheet of paper. And the story, I'm not going to bore you with the details of the story, except to say that I was very lucky to personally be a small part of the team that helped translate NEC 3 to NEC 4. You can see there's a gap of 12 years between 3 and 4. That's 12 years of learning, 12 years of little ideas that made NEC 4 better than NEC 3. The other point there is that the contract was mandated for use in construction contracts by the Hong Kong government, which is quite radical. We have some interest from the funding institutions, which we'll talk about later, but they still love their deal that they have with Fidic, which we'll talk about later. So my plan for the presentation is on the screen. Basic strengths and problems with NEC, then a direct comparison with Fidic, and then a little bit of a story about the use of NEC globally. I probably won't bore you with the Mott Macdonald expertise. So strengths and pitfalls. Those people that looked at the contracts back in 1985, they recognized these as problems with their contracts. There were too many disputes. Most contracts were all about sorting out problems rather than actually delivering the project. They were not designed to be management procedures. They had not enough emphasis on the program, and they were very inflexible. In the UK at the time, we had a contract for civil engineers, one for mechanical engineering, one for electrical engineering, one for chemical engineering. These people said, why don't we have a contract that can be flexible? I wonder whether some of these problems are true in your 40 countries of the world. Maybe you should just type into your chat box any particular problems you see with your standard forms of contract that you're using. Drop in a couple of lines and we'll see if Rajesh can make any sense of those for a question. Possibly too difficult on a call this size. When those people set off with NEC, they started with their core principles. What should a new form of contract be like? How should it be different? And I have tried this many times in training sessions. I ask people the questions, and always we can group their answers like this. They want flexibility from their form of contract. They want clarity and simplicity from their form of contract. And they want a contract that actually stimulates good management. Those were the three founding principles of NEC, and the rules, should I say, for how the contract has been developed over the last 25 years. So clarity and simplicity. Plain, simple, short words, short sentences, readable English. The contract has an excellent structure. obviously I'm biased because I've been using it for 25 years. It does have to have some very minor changes to suit local law. So we have no more than a page of text to suit particular UK aspects of law, and you may guess where YNZ2 is used, New Zealand. Because it's written in English, it will be easy to translate when that is required. I am intentionally silent while you try to read that sentence. That is typical of the language which we see in construction contracts around the world. And many of you are listening to me, and I am speaking in your second language. And I think it is wrong that we expect people working in a second language to deal with sentences like that. In NEC, we have simple sentences and simple language. So for example, the contractor designs the parts of the works which the works information states he is to design. Now the works information is a document that we have to write to tell the contractor what he has to do. So in old language, that is specifications and drawings. But from that sentence, it's very clear that you have to be very clear about which design you want the contractor to do. In fact, that sentence is also critical for the flexibility of NEC, because it allows NEC, particularly the engineering construction contract, to be used for any level of contractor design. Throughout the contract, we use the present tense, which is quite radical. Everything is written in the present tense. The contractor submits, the project manager responds. It's all written in a very active way. And throughout the contract, it uses this structure, a reason for not accepting is. So the contract sets out specific reasons for not accepting things, and the project manager has to take into account those reasons. Flexibility. Flexibility as you need it. NEC can cover any aspects of projects or services, even supply, complex jobs, simple jobs, and any sector. We are speaking here today through the Institution of Civil Engineers, but the NEC is not a civil engineering contract. It's a contract for doing things. How do you want to use your contract? The NEC can be used for almost any procurement strategy. It can be used, as I've just shown, for any level of contractor's design. We'll see in a moment there are a range of payment options, and NEC is very good at clear, flexible risk allocation. Where can we use NEC? You may guess the next slide or the next bullet point, anywhere in the world. This picture now is about the family of the NEC documents, and most of you on the call are involved in this process, taking an asset from business case to design to construction and then to operating. That's the case for simple projects and for highly complex projects. And anywhere in this space on my screen, if you need somebody from a different organization to do some work for you, you will need a contract, obvious. So if you want somebody to design something for you or provide any professional service, which could be helping you write a business case over here, or it could be helping you better operate your existing water treatment plant over here, you can use the NEC's professional services contract. If you want to actually construct something, you will use the engineering and construction contract. Apologies for all the abbreviations, it's just inevitable, the ECC. And you see on the picture, I've shown this as including design, because I showed you 2 minutes ago that the contract allows you to tell the contractor how much design they have to do. Contractors don't really do anything. a little bit harsh, but they do tend to use subcontracts a lot. So the NEC family has a subcontract document which has exactly the same structure as the main contract, the same processes, the same words, the same clause numbers. But these contracts here are for complex, significant projects. You would not use them for a very small scale project. Instead, you should use the engineering construction short contract. I'm currently discussing this with a team of people who are looking at improving the contracts for work done by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and using this short contract is an option. Oh, but we need a subcontract. There's a subcontract version of the short contract. If we want a service, we want to provide a physical service, we can use the term service contract. Or we have a short-term service contract. You can see a bit of a pattern here. We also have a framework contract, which is where the client chooses possibly a group of suppliers within which we will tender for later projects using any of these contracts shown above on the slide. We have an adjudicator's contract to employ someone to sort out the mess when people don't run the contract properly. We have contracts for supply, and most recently we have a short version of the professional services contract. So I hope it makes sense from the slide. There's a lot of information on the slide. The message is that if you need a contract, NEC has one in the NEC family, but the beauty of NEC is the language and the structure are all the same. So all of them have early warnings and compensation events, for example, which we will talk a little bit about more. NEC 4 came out in 2017 and extended the family. That's a small change. That's a small change. We have a subcontract published now for the professional services contract, and we have a subcontract for the term service contract. The bigger change is this one. We now have a contract for design, build, and operate as an NEC contract. So that's the equivalent of the Fidic Gold Book. And even more radically, we now have an alliance contract, which is a multi-party contract to bring everybody in the construction process in together to sign up to a single contract. So that's the family. Any questions on the family? Please drop them in for my friend. Now, showing more detail for one of the particular members of the family, the engineering construction contract, the contract is modular. It starts with what we call core clauses, which actually make up more than 80% of the words. So those clauses which deal with program and change and defects, the standard things, those are in your core clauses, which will be there whatever NEC contract options you use. Then as a client, you have to choose between one of 6 what we call main options, and they are all to do with payment. We'll talk about those a little bit more on a later slide. So you have to choose one of those 6 options. Then you have to choose an option for how you want to resolve your disputes. W2 is the standard for UK. W1 is a standard starting point internationally, and W3 is a new option in NEC 4 for a dispute avoidance board, which of course is very common on international, certainly large international projects. Then you have this huge shopping list of what we call secondary options. Please.
There's a couple of questions that I'm seeing on the chat box. One question is, what do you mean by alliance contract? Is it like a consortium or it's something else?
Okay, very good question. The alliance contract is different from a consortium. In a consortium, the client has one contract with the consortium, and the consortium then deals out its own issues within its own joint venture agreement or with its own subcontractors. With an alliance contract, everyone is at the same level at the table. So whether they're consultants or contractors or even what we might call subcontractors, they are all joined together imagine them joined together at the hip, and they all sign up to delivering to meet the target set by the client. It's it's innovative. I personally haven't dealt with an alliance contract, which is a bit of a shame. I'm working on it. But it's something which is coming much more prevalent now. Not prevalent yet, it's still rare, but it is happening, and it's the way procurement is moving in the UK. Okay.
Great. There's another question I have. We say multi-party contract, how it can be more beneficial?
Okay, well, that's the same story as I was just saying with the alliance. The main the main reason for going to an alliance, it's complex, let me say that now, but the main reason for the alliance is that everybody shares the same aims, and therefore the commercial incentive is for everybody to work together. Whereas if you have separate people acting on your same project, you always will have interfaces between them, and those interfaces will be at the risk of the client.
Great.
Is that enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another question, whether NSC contracts cover the range of contracts covered by Fidic, essentially the gold, yellow, red.
That's coming later. That's coming later. I'm coming to that. Don't worry. I need to get to that. Otherwise, I'm having trouble.
And there's another question for you.
Okay.
Has NEC been ever used in India? If so, which type of projects?
It has been used in India. We'll see that later, mainly in big airport projects. So after the secondary options, sorry, thank you for the questions though, because breaking it up with questions is such a good idea. Contracts is boring. So the more questions, the better. On top of the secondary options, we have what I call jurisdiction-specific options. So these are specific to the particular law that you're working under. As I've mentioned, we have a few in the UK. And then at the top, we have what Fidic calls particular conditions of contract. NEC calls them option Z, and those are the additional conditions of contract, where a client can clearly make changes to the standard form, just as you are used to with particular conditions in Fidic. Stimulus to good management. What do I mean by that? 4 things. Firstly, NEC is very good and very rigorous about communications. Most communications use the word notify, and where the contract says notify, they have to be on a separate communication. NEC is all about clear, short, concise communications. The program is massive. I could give you today a 3-hour training course on the program under NEC contracts. Most of you are involved in project management of some sort. Most of you would agree that the program is important. The difference between NEC and other contracts is that the accepted program is actually used directly in the assessment of what you under Fidic would call claims. NEC has a process called early warning, which is very, very simple, a requirement to notify the other party if you see a problem. But unlike Fidic, there are very clear processes following that early warning, and there is a penalty to the contractor if the contractor does not give an early warning. Lastly here, compensation events. This is NEC's word for what you, if you are a Fidic user, you would understand as variations or claims. In NEC, the only reason that the contractor can get any more time and money is if a compensation event occurs. And NEC is very good and very clear at compensation events. On this next slide, firstly, they are almost in one place. In clause 60.1, there is a list of 21 compensation events. That compares with Fidic, where the clauses under which you can claim are scattered all over the Fidic contract. In NEC, we assess time and cost for all compensation events. The compensation event process is exactly the same for all of the compensation events. The assessment is not based on the bill of quantity rates or the activity schedule prices. It's based on the real forecast, sorry, the real cost of the event, the real effect at that time on the contractor's program and the contractor's cost. That's easy to say, but it does mean that both sides have to properly understand the cost and time impacts of these compensation events. And this is probably the most important word in the whole of the NEC. The change process, which is compensation events, in most contracts, the contract tells you to keep records, get the records agreed, keep records, wait until it's all over, and then we'll try and agree the cost of the claim. In NEC, as soon as the compensation event is notified, the project manager and the contractor are required to do their best to agree a forecast of the effect on time and on cost. And once that forecast is agreed, that is the deal, and we move forward. It is so much more proactive in management than most other forms of contract. And when it comes to assessing these compensation events, there's a very clear process for doing so, and that's on this slide. It's almost like I've...
Hey, Richard, another few questions actually.
Please carry on.
So, India doesn't have a construction law like UK, so how is why UK2 applied in India?
No, it won't be applied in India, sorry. So at the moment, because NEC is not routinely used in India, there are no specifically published changes into the contract to comply with Indian law. I will be honest, I do not know whether there need to be. I will show you in a moment that NEC has been used in India. Those projects were huge, and the NEC would have been reviewed by the client's lawyers to make sure there was no problem with using NEC in India. In South Africa, for example, there are no Y clauses because the contract does not conflict in any way with South African law. Is that clear?
Yeah, fine. I think there are a couple of other questions which we can take probably. What is contractual legal difference between accepted and approved?
Ah, there's a lovely question. It depends what it says in your contract. In NEC, clause 14.1 says that any acceptance does not change the contractor's obligations under the contract. So if the PM accepts something, he may have had a bad day and accepted something that they shouldn't have, but it does not change the contractor's obligations. If you approve something in NEC, then you will have to try and find a lawyer to tell you what the difference is between approval and acceptance. In Fidic, it's similar. Fidic says approve, but again, Fidic has a clause which says approval doesn't really mean anything. It's still the contractor's problem. The answer to your question is it depends what it says in your contract. Okay. Shall I continue?
Yeah, there is another few more questions. In fact, there are lots of them popping up now. So NEC family of contracts seems to be extensive. What arrangements are in place to ensure that applications are appropriate?
To ensure that what are appropriate? Applications?
Applications are appropriate, yeah.
Okay, well I'm sorry, but that's just a question of understanding and having proper understanding of the contracts to make sure you are using the right contracts. I can only start today. I'm more than happy to help out in the future.
Sure. Then does NEC has a limitation of common law compared to civil law, especially when it comes to enforceability?
Very good question again. NEC, its background, its original starting point was in the UK, common law. And you'll see later that in terms of usage, at the moment, its most usage is in UK, South Africa, Hong Kong, New Zealand, starting in Australia. It's sort of like following the Commonwealth around the world, mainly because of language, I think, and a lack of understanding and a lack of presentations like today, I would argue. But there's no reason why it cannot be used in common law countries. In civil law countries. I've shown you it's been used in Holland, It's planned to be used in Belgium for a very big contract. The reason is because the contract is written as a project management tool. It is just common sense for doing projects. It very, very rarely does it conflict with local law. That said, as I will get to later in the presentation, if you do want to use NEC in your country, clearly it will have to be reviewed by local lawyers. My top tip there is make sure you get your local lawyers trained in NEC before you ask them to start changing it.
Sure. Then there is another interesting question about compensation. Almost all in one place. Are there any other clauses other than clause 61 where compensation events are available in NEC4?
Okay, brilliant. I was giving this slide this morning to my training group. There are two other compensation events in main options B and D, which relate to bill of quantities. There are some additional compensation events, one each, in some of the secondary options. So for example, one of the secondary options is about a change in the law. Who do you want to take the risk if the law changes? So if you use secondary option X2, that adds in an additional compensation event, a change in the law. And lastly, you can always change the compensation events or add to the compensation events in the additional conditions of contract, or too much detail for today, in another document called the contract data. So there's one space in the contract, a little bit like the appendix to form of tender in Fidic, where you can add in additional compensation events just for your contract. Okay.
Right. Then there's another question from Ben Crossley. Richard, is compensation event forecast normally resolved close to the event as envisaged?
Okay. Well, as I'm just going to come to a timescale process in a minute. Let me deal with that on the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Let's get going. Yeah.
Let's get going. I love the questions though. Keep the questions coming. It makes it so much more interesting for everybody. So the basic process for a compensation event, if the project manager has caused it, for example, by changing the scope, they notify the compensation event and at the same time instruct the contractor to give you a quotation. The contractor has three weeks to provide a quote, 2 weeks to reply. The project manager has 2 weeks to reply. I should have said that NEC, or the engineering construction contract, uses the name project manager in italics. I lean to the right to do my italics. The project manager is the equivalent of the engineer in a Fidic contract. They have 2 weeks to reply. The ideal is that they can accept, because they have been talking and discussing this quotation informally before it was even submitted. That's the ideal world. Alternatively, the project manager cannot agree and ask for a revision, or the project manager can step in and say, I've given you a chance, you've tried again, now I'm going to make my assessment. I'm in charge. This is the answer to the compensation event. That's the basic process in NEC. On the other hand, if the contractor notifies a compensation event, firstly, they have very clearly only 8 weeks to do so. After 8 weeks, they lose their entitlement. Contractor notifies. The only difference is there's one extra step in the process, because the project manager has a clause under which to say yes or no. If they say yes, it is a compensation event under the contract because it's in that nice list that I talked about. Then we flip to the other side of the process and the project manager instructs the quote, and we carry on the same way on the process as I've talked about there. And there are also clauses, this is probably too much detail, but if the project manager does not respond in these times, the contractor can go back and say, excuse me, project manager, you're useless. At which point they have another 2 weeks to respond. And if they don't respond within the further 2 weeks, then the quotation or the notification is deemed accepted. There's a lot more to it, but that's the basic principle for the timescales. And critically, that applies to all all compensation events, all changes, anything under your contract. This is so systematic.
Hey, Richard, can we take a couple of more questions? Because
Yeah, go on. I love the questions. I'm never going to get through. I hope you guys have got 2.5 hours for this presentation, but carry on.
Fidic have value engineering clauses, clause 13.2. Is it are similar clauses available in NEC as well?
Simple answer, yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Then I will take one more question. How are early warning and compensation events linked?
Okay, really good question. I could send you a little article I wrote on these things a few years ago. It's probably hanging on my LinkedIn profile if you want to look. They are separate. You don't have, if a compensation event has happened, you just notify the event because it's happened. The concept of early warning is that the clue is in the word early. It hasn't happened yet. It's something that we are warning each other of. The only direct link in the contract, I think I mentioned, if the contractor does not give an early warning when the contractor should have given an early warning, the assessment of the compensation event is based upon what would have happened if the contractor did give the project manager the early warning, in which case the project manager would have had the opportunity to do something different. So that's the commercial slap in the contract for not giving an early warning. Okay. I'll move on, if I may.
Yeah, please. Yeah, no problem. We'll take. There are many more questions, but I think we'll take them a little
That's
later.
great. The contract is so systematic that there are several web-based tools available to help you manage the contract in the cloud. Those people that have developed those systems have now, they can now tell us that they have done the same thing with Fidic. I find it very difficult because I've been doing Fidic for 25 years and I still struggle to find the processes within Fidic. Fidic claims that the 2017 version is better. We'll talk about that later. So these tools are absolutely excellent to promote professional contract and project management. In the modern digital world, all you people out there, 250 people on the call, it is crazy that we still try to manage contracts by email with please find attached little form. It's criminal. We should be using these in the cloud tools. And I am not on commission. If NEC was invented today, we might add another core principle, which is about collaboration. In NEC, everything I've said so far is good at increasing collaboration, clear processes, good program, and so on. NEC also has an option. X20 is for key performance incentives, KPIs. We can build in KPIs to encourage things that we want to encourage. The big change from NEC is the concept of a target contract, which is where the contractor gives you a price, but we don't pay the contractor that tendered price. We actually pay the contractor's real costs. And if the contractor finishes under that target price, there is a share. The share we call the gain is shared between client and contractor. That encourages and incentivizes the client to collaborate directly with the contractor. We also have a secondary option for what we call early contractor involvement, which is becoming more common in the UK, where we have a contractor is employed early on before we've even developed the details of the contract. The contractor is employed to work with the client to develop the detail of the ultimate construction contract. We have an option for multi-party collaboration, and I've already mentioned the extreme of collaboration is the alliance contract. So as a client, you can decide how far you want to push the NEC's options for collaboration. I don't know what it's like in your part of the world, but in the UK, the emphasis is really very much in our world on trying to encourage better collaboration. Procurement's moved on. We've got better risk.
Can we take some more questions now?
We can.
There's a question about what is the equivalent of Fidic Silver Book in NEC?
That's coming later.
Okay, then how pain and gain is covered under alliance contracts between client and the partners?
Okay, in the alliance contract, like I said, I'm not an expert, but we have a document called the performance table. And in that performance table, completely up to the client, we have to develop the incentives, the targets, and the what we're going to say, what's going to happen if those targets are beaten or missed. So it's a completely open plan document for you to write in how you're going to share the pain or the gain. In the NEC standard target contracts, there is a very clear mechanism to set out how we want to share the pain and gain for that one particular contract. But the normal target contract will be a typical, we would say in English, a bi-party contract just between two people. So
right,
all of
another very pertinent question in the current times, especially as we all are struggling through the pandemic. How is force majeure addressed in NEC with respect to Fidic clause?
Okay, lovely question. Absolutely brilliant. Too much detail for today, but never mind, I'll try. NEC does not use words like force majeure because nobody knows what they mean. NEC instead has a clause which says if something happens that nobody could possibly have foreseen, wasn't caused by the party, and actually stops you completing the work on time, that is then a compensation event. So I will be honest, I would like to, if I was writing an NEC contract tomorrow, I would add another compensation event when it says a pandemic is announced by the WHO. That's not in the NEC standard, it's not in NEC 4, but I think it would have been good if that had been in NEC. I'll leave it at that, if I may.
Okay, great. I think let's proceed further.
Let me press on. I need to get onto the Fidic bit. So that's the pitch for NEC, a better way of doing business. We've got standardization, flexibility, good processes, encourage collaborative working. Why on earth would you not look and have a look at least at doing NEC? Most of you people on the call are clearly involved in and interested in contracts. You are also intelligent people. You are taking your time to look around you. My first slide, remember, the dangerous thing is we always do what we've always done. And in the world of procurement, we are always been doing Fidic, hence we need to look. So problems with NEC, it needs management. It does not manage itself. All this agreeing of changes as we go along, that takes resources, it takes time. Therefore, the client has to have those resources, but those are for the good reasons that you can read on the slide. It is definitely not a contract to put, as we say in English, in the bottom drawer. It's not a contract that you only bring out when there's a problem. It's a contract to use to tell you what to do next. It's different. It is very, very different from other forms of contract. You need to understand that. You need to have a mindset that we are going to make this contract work collaboratively together. There is a need for delegation because there are a lot of actions of the project manager. I find very often in my work with clients, there are problems with a clash of organizational procedures. For example, if the project manager has to make decisions about a £2 million compensation event quotation in 2 weeks, that causes problems if he has to go through 4 layers of management within the client to be able to make a decision. You can see the potential problems. And you do need programming skills. Program is critical to NEC. That will be a problem for some people on the call. The main problem is a lack of understanding, a lack of training as to how the contract is required to work. I am clearly biased here because I spend a lot of my life giving training on NEC contracts. To make NEC...
Richard, just a quick question over here. I think the NEC format is probably a lot more collaborative and requires a different kind of mindset, which is something that you covered in the previous slide. I think to some extent, this is also based on a mutually trusted relationship between the client and the contractor, or the other way around. So, do you think that the maturity of the market also plays a significant role in the willingness to embrace NEC type of contract?
That's a really good point, obviously. And if we want to have contracts that set ourselves up to fight, then carry on with what you're doing. NEC encourages collaboration, but clearly that only works if people are willing and want to collaborate. It's not an easy thing to do. But if you want a lump sum contract and you want to put lots of risk on the contractor, you can do that with NEC. It's not a problem. You use NEC option A, you delete some options. Let me move on. I've already taken up best part of an hour because of, well, it's just too much detail. Let me move on to the comparisons with Fidic, if I may, because that's what we're really here for. To start with, can we use it internationally? A renowned lawyer said yes. Richard Patterson said yes in a little article that I wrote about NEC last time. Maybe I can share that one with you after this presentation. And I don't know whether we have the opportunity to share information to those on the call. Perhaps we can do that. If not, you can find it with a quick Google. This is just a couple of pages on how we can use NEC internationally. So let's move on then, where you really want to know about NEC versus Fidic. Fidic, like most contracts, traditionally is focused on liabilities and risk allocation in the way contracts have always been written. NEC, as I've said, is different. It allows much more flexible and clearer risk allocation. Does require, as we've just talked about, a collaborative management of the project, and it is proven to encourage those sorts of behaviors. That's the high level style. Having said that, I've shown you the style of the writing in the clauses I showed you earlier on in the presentation. In terms of clarity, I'm used to using Fidic 1999, and that was much better than previous editions. Some of you will have already started looking at Fidic 2017, and the pitch by Fidic for 2017 issues suggests that it is more management focused, more clear timescales. Effectively, they're trying, I would say, they're trying to catch up a little bit with the management processes within the NEC. But the latest Fidic Red Book contract has 50,000 words. It weighs a kilogram. I don't need to say any more. NEC, I've said, clarity and simplicity is one of its guiding principles. It's written in plain English. Okay, this is an important slide now for some of the questions that you've been asked. This is my slide for the comparisons. Consultancy contract, Fidic has the white book. NEC, as I've shown you, has the professional services contract and the shorter version. Most important for most of you, NEC has the engineering construction contract. That's been the main focus of my presentation. Fidic historically has split this into different options. The Fidic Red Book, as most of you will know, is a bill of quantities contract, and it's designed for where most of the design is done by the client. Fidic Yellow Book is a design and build contract where the contractor takes design responsibility, and normally it's lump sum, but Fidic just says go and write a payment schedule. So you have to have a bespoke payment schedule to make the Yellow Book work. Silver Book is basically another version, and Silver Book basically just puts more risk on the contractor. It's still design and build, but most importantly, the physical condition risk, the ground risk, is put straight away onto the contractor. NEC, because the ECC is so flexible, you can do any of those with the engineering construction contract. Next slide. Subcontracts. Services. Fidic doesn't do a service contract, NEC does. Design, build, operate. NEC was late to the market. NEC, I can tell I'm going faster. I need to slow down. I'm sorry. Fidic has for years had the gold book for design, build, operate. Now we have the NEC for design, build, operate contract. Fidic doesn't do frameworks, NEC does. Fidic doesn't yet do alliances, NEC does. Annoyingly, Fidic does a joint venture agreement, NEC has not produced one. I don't know why, I keep trying to ask them to do so. So that's quite a big slide in terms of the comparison. This slide is better because I'm a trainer, I like pictures. For me, those two axes on the graph are fundamental in designing your next contract. How much design do we want done by the contractor? And what level of price certainty do we want from the contractor? Fidic Red Book contract is a remeasurement contract. Silver is lump sum, and to the right-hand side, it's contractor design. Now, Fidic Red Book has some provisions to allow the contractor to do some of the design. And in Fidic Yellow Book, of course, it depends in how you've written your employer's requirements, inevitably how much design has already been done by the employer in Fidic or the client in NEC4. Fidic Silver Book, as I said, is really just a little bit more to the right, absolutely 100% contractor designed and more risk and therefore more price certainty. This is where the letters in NEC come out. No, sorry, it isn't. I'll go back a stage. The first thing, NEC allows you to do any level of contractor design. We talked about that earlier. And when it comes to price certainty, we have the pricing options. Do you remember on a slide before, my little stacking slide of options? You had different options for the payment mechanism. Very simplistically, option A is a lump sum. Option B is a BOQ. Option C is target, and option E is completely reimbursable or cost plus. So you have the 80% of the words are in the core clauses, but if you want a lump sum, you choose option A, and then you add in 2 pages only of clauses which make your contract into a lump sum contract. If you want a BOQ, option B, and so on. That's probably one of the most important slides emphasizing the flexibility of the engineering and construction contract. Is that clear to anybody? Anybody questions on that one? I assume not. Silence is acceptance, as we say as a trainer.
Yeah, actually, there are still queries flowing in, actually, but not specific to this slide. I think we might see some. If there is something to do with this slide, I'll get back to you, Richard.
Okay, I'll carry on then.
Yeah.
When it comes to smaller works contracts, Fidic has the Green Book, which can be a mixture of lump sum and remeasurement. NEC has the engineering construction short contract, and it's not really designed for a lot of contractor design, I'll be honest. If you have a lot of contractor design, you're probably better moving to the engineering construction contract, the big one. And out of interest, you'll find that if you read the World Bank smaller works contracts, which I'm sure some of you will do because you are from those 40 countries around the world, the World Bank smaller contract uses words like uses words like compensation event and early warning. Interestingly, because at the time that World Bank contract was being drafted, the World Bank asked a chap called Martin Barnes, who is our guru, our main instigator of NEC all those years ago. He was also involved in helping the World Bank with its smaller works contracts. I am trying to get NEC to try to talk to the banks to get them to adopt the engineering construction short contract rather than their World Bank smaller works contract. It's a much clearer and a much better contract, but I would say that. Stimulus to good management, probably repeating what we've said. General objective is, in terms of stimulating good management, that's a specific objective of the NEC. Fidic has a clause about early warning, but there's no follow-up process. There's no clear consequences for not giving early warning. Whereas in NEC, very clear process, routine early warning meetings. Now in NEC4 at a routine interval set out in the contract data. And if the contractor does not notify an early warning, as I said, the compensation event that might come out will be assessed as if they had. So there's a clear incentive for the contractor to give early warning. Program, Fidic says the contractor submits a program whenever progress is inconsistent with the program, and that's about it. In NEC, we haven't had time to talk about it in detail, but believe me, the accepted program is used directly to evaluate the time impacts of every compensation event. That's how NEC directs itself to help you manage your project. NEC is all about project management. When it comes to change management, we've got in Fidic, we've got specific provisions for variations, different types of risk events, amazes me in Fidic that some risk events the contractor gets cost, sometimes they get time only, sometimes they get time and cost, sometimes they get time and cost and profit. In NEC, as I've already explained, it's a change management process. They're all compensation events. They're all clearly listed. They're all dealt with by the same process. And we've got the same rules for all of them. So from a management perspective, for me, there is no comparison. And very clear, tight timescales to try and get compensation events sorted throughout the duration of the project. That in turn gives both the buyer, the client, and the contractor a better ongoing forecast of the final completion date, as well as the final cost. International use then, as you all know, Fidic is by far the most widely used standard form and brand of contract. It has a very, very well recognized brand. It's been there, that brand is largely because of the relationships Fidic has with the international lenders, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and so on. Most of you will know that Fidic has what they call their harmonized version, which is Fidic Red Book, with some changes to suit the health and safety and environmental, for example, issues that are important to the banks. And for the last, I don't know, at least 25 years since I've been doing procurement, if a client borrows money from the banks, the client has to use Fidic, because that's the rule, because the bank says you have to use Fidic. Another positive for Fidic is that it has already been widely translated. That is not the case yet for NEC. I was in touch with the NEC's general manager last night in front of this presentation, and I'm told to share with you that NEC is currently working on a version of the NEC in Spanish, mainly driven by the interest in the NEC, firstly in Peru. NEC, in contrast, endorsed by UK government, endorsed by South African government, mandated in Hong Kong, used a little and growing in New Zealand, starting to be used very, very recently in Australia. Sydney Water is using it for its 10-year procurement program. Occasional use in India, we'll see some slides in a moment. Peru, and some very limited use in Western Europe. There is no question, internationally, Fidic is miles away in the lead, because people don't like change. Sorry, I'm just going to get my mouse right. So I'm going to flick through these slides very quickly now, if you don't mind, because I'm conscious of time. In terms of global use, I've just got some pretty pictures. NEC has what it calls its users group, which has more than 600 members across the world. Mandated in Hong Kong, we've talked about. I'm very proud of my own role with Mott Macdonald in Hong Kong. I took NEC to Hong Kong in the Mott Macdonald office, trained up our people in Hong Kong to the extent that they can do this now. They don't need me. And since that date, Mott Macdonald has had 29 NEC contracts, different types of contracts, different types of departments. As you see there, total capital value of about £2.5 billion. And maybe what it was probably about 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, NEC was unheard of in Hong Kong. There it changed because of government wanted to contract. Government did some research, and Hong Kong government wanted what it called a partnering contract. They use NEC, they trialed it, and now they use it extensively. That's an article from me at the time. South Africa, it's one of 4 forms sanctioned for government spend and has been used for some major projects, big port and railway projects in particular. There's some little interest in other countries in Africa. I've given training in Ethiopia, of all places, but I don't think it's been used there yet. I was involved as a trainer for an environmental cleanup project in North Africa. That was done by Shell. That was unusually in option D, but detail. As mentioned, it's being used heavily by a company called Meridian Energy, which is the biggest renewable power provider in New Zealand. They started with NEC. They actually compared it with Fidic. One of the very few papers published was by their people, because they had two separate projects side by side, one using Fidic, one using NEC for some mechanical and electrical retrofit work, rehabilitation work. They did that, and they did it with the same people using Fidic on one hand and NEC on the other. At the end of the project, all of the people said, can we use NEC next time? And they have done. So they're a big user of NEC in New Zealand. That's been followed by others, as you can see there in UK, in Australia. It's been used for one big wind farm project, and now it's being used by Sydney Water. Very, very, very little use in the Middle East, because in the Middle East, clients have a very risk-averse approach to contracts. They put all the risk on the contractor. I was involved in one small project, so-called Jumeirah Golf Estates, where it was used in Dubai. It has been thought about for use, but those big projects were stalled back in the economic crisis of a good few years ago. India, finally we get to India. I apologize because we have a few Indians on the call. NEC engineering construction contract was used for a $1 billion project. Sorry, not the ECC. The ECC and the professional service contract and the term service contract were used on Delhi International Airport with one of your biggest contractors, Larsen & Toubro. I've mentioned the criminal court in the Netherlands. I've mentioned the games venues all across Peru. This was a radical step for Peru. It was driven by some international funding from the UK to Peru, but I've had lots of interest now. We are getting a lot of interest in Peru. The Peruvian government has changed its law to allow NEC, and I must admit, and Fidic to be used for their big projects, which is and as I said, that's leading to interest in getting NEC translated into Spanish. In the States and Canada, United States, it's very, very difficult. The United States is really 50 countries. They all have their own organizations, and there's very little use of standard forms at all. And as I'm sure you're aware, the lawyers rule. So there is very, very, very difficult to get a standard form of contract into the US. I am lucky. I can say that I'm probably the only person that has ever given training in the US. I was flown to New York to give a one-day training course for a project run by a UK government client, actually in New York City. But there is some interest, and particularly on mega projects where they're looking at early contractor involvement, NEC would be ideal for that use, and I will keep pushing. Peru, I've mentioned before, sorry, more detail. The IFIs, International Financial Institutions, as we've said, we have the MDB harmonized book. To use NEC with those banks will be a significant change, and it seems that all of them have now done another deal with Fidic to promote Fidic 2017. I have no idea how that deal is done, but I am obviously completely biased, but I think it's rather strange that these big international organizations are forcing clients to do contracts in one particular way. There is some discussion between NEC and those international financing institutions. I myself presented to EBRD last year on behalf of NEC. There is some trialing of it going on in Nepal, would you believe? And as I've mentioned, we have a Spanish version. In terms of NEC's business development, then clearly bringing the funding agencies, getting the funding agencies to at least allow clients to think about using NEC must be a big thing that NEC needs to do. And I've got a few slides here about how wonderful Mott Macdonald is, but I'm going to spare you because I've already taken up an hour and a half or more of your time. I'd much rather answer some questions on NEC, if I may. I set out to give you the strengths and pitfalls of NEC. I set out to compare NEC with Fidic and to tell you where NEC is being used. I hope I have achieved those three aims, but I'm very, very keen to have any questions that are out there.
Fantastic. Thanks for that presentation, Richard. I think we have lots of questions coming in still. In UK, you have JCT contracts also in addition to NEC. Is it equally flexible?
Okay, I know very little about JCT. JCT is called the Joint Contracts Tribunal. It's basically a contract which has been around for many years in the building sector, not infrastructure, but building in the UK. And yes, it has some choices, but its language, it's nowhere. I mean, again, if you're interested, Google NEC versus JCT, and there is a published paper on that. I can share that with anybody if they want it. But in principle, JCT is written in, shall I say, old school English. It has more in common with the old Institution of Civil Engineers contract, which NEC replaced. I'm not an expert in JCT. It's interesting, in the UK, NEC was used very heavily, it grew very quickly in the infrastructure market, possibly, of course, because it was published by the Institution of Civil. Also because at that time, collaboration and partnering were very popular, and there was lots of use of the NEC target contract. Now, JCT and Fidic and other contracts don't have that target option. I'll leave it at that. I'm not an expert in Fidic. What's interesting now is that NEC, I would say, is used probably in, we don't have the data, but I would say certainly the majority of infrastructure projects in the UK. But for the smaller buildings, then it would have to be JCT is more popular. If I can, I'd like to make one admission to you. You're not going to like this admission. Currently, I am a very lucky person. It's a long story, but I have a small fruit farm, and on that fruit farm, I am building 3 little buildings. Now, I'm now about to make a very public acknowledgement. We're using JCT. I'm sorry, but my architect insisted that in the local building market with a small scale builder for 3 little buildings, he wasn't going to try and use the engineering construction short contract because everybody knows JCT and we always do it that way. Sorry, carry on.
That's a common problem, actually, isn't it? So there are other questions about, is there a clause in NEC pertaining to delayed payments to contractor?
Yes. You get interest, and in the UK, because of UK law, you also get the right to suspend performance.
Right. Can NEC be used for small scale projects, or is there any financial eligibility for using NEC?
Really good question. I started using NEC 25 years ago when one of the biggest water companies in the UK, they realized they were using 4 or 5 different forms of contract. They standardized on NEC. At the time, they had a number of £500,000 for the biggest contract they wanted to use the NEC engineering construction short contract for. So anything over £500,000, it was worth going to the engineering construction, the big contract with all the options that I've showed you about today. I could give you a presentation on the short contract, but that's not for today. Maybe we can sort that one out later. But so the correct answer from me is it's not a matter of value, it's more a matter of complexity. If it's a simple contract, and if you want a price-based contract, either quantities or activities or a mixture of both, and it's simple, then you should have a good look at the engineering construction short contract, which is only 15 pages long. And as I said before, I am in discussions with an organization that this organization's total raison d'etre is to help NGOs, non-government organizations, improve their commercial practices and contracts. And the short contract would be ideal for those projects. Rajesh, any more?
Yeah, I'll probably give you one last question before we close the session. How contractors' default is dealt with NECs, especially with regards to liquidated damages and penalties?
Okay, good question. So as you would expect, one of the options in the contract is delay damages. We don't use silly words like liquidated. What does liquidated mean? Let's use a simple word. Let's just call it delay damages. To be fair, even Fidic does that now. So we have delay damages, which is a choice for a client. It's getting to too much detail now, but there is also an option X17 for performance damages. So the best example of that, and we're not all engineers, but there's lots of engineers on this call. We should be focusing on whole life cost. We are trying to save the world, remember, people? We are trying to save the world. So the most simple example is that many projects with contractor design end up with an asset that includes use of power. A water treatment plant is an obvious example. So what you can do with NEC, as you can do with Fidic Yellow Book, to be fair, you can ask the contractor to guarantee not only a price, but you can also ask a guarantee of energy consumption per cubic meter of water. You can then test that when the project is commissioned. And if they use more water than they promised, then you can include in your contract a performance damage. So the client can take off of the contractor the additional long-term cost, usually calculated as a net present cost of that extra power consumption. So that can be done in Fidic Yellow Book. It can be done in the NEC's engineering construction contract.
Fantastic. I think questions are still flowing in like anything. But I think
Rajesh,
we will have to pull the plug now. Yeah. So
yeah,
probably
you have to pull
what
the
we can
plug.
do in that
Rajesh,
case.
if you want me to, if you have a way of getting those questions into a simple document, I am more than happy, because I'm a sad enthusiast for NEC. I'm more than happy to answer those questions in a quick answer, and then you can publish that to anybody who's interested.
That's fine, no problem. So I think, guys, you have all heard it directly from Richard. So please send out your list of questions to me within end of business tomorrow, so I can tabulate everybody's questions and send it off to Richard, and we'll try to publish that through our media channels.
I was going to say, is it not possible? It's up to you. I don't know, Rajesh, but if it's possible to take it straight from the chat in Zoom, then I can. If you can copy and paste from the chat, then it will be quick. It will be quick. It will be quicker and easier to let them do that now rather than sending you separate documents. That's just my thought.
Right. I think I can do that too, but I think it'll just need more effort and it might take a little bit more time.
Okay, fine.
So absolutely fine. If I can extract some questions from there, I'll definitely share that with you too. I think overall, the looking at the interest on the topic, probably, Richard, I would request you to think about another session with you. In fact, maybe you can take a specific part of NEC that for which there is a pertinent interest, and we can actually have a separate
I would love to ask your people what they want to hear about, and I'm sure we can do something similar.
So with that, I would just like to reiterate that all of the video is being recorded. Now we are going to publish the video pretty soon. It will take some processing time, and then subsequently we edit the versions and we post the edited versions through the YouTube channels and through other media channels available, primarily LinkedIn, Facebook, Insta, and Twitter handles. So please follow IC India on these handles. If you have any questions or you're not able to access these, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to send you direct links to these media channels. With that, I think we'll come to the close of the session. Richard, I'm extremely thankful to you for for providing a wonderful insight about NEC against Fidic contracts. I think we had a fabulous crowd today. Everybody was absolutely engaged and very much in the discussion right now, and I'm really glad that we did this. We really have a very strong presence across the globe through this particular platform, and I'm quite happy that we all would have learned something about Fidic and NEC contracts today. With that, we come to the close of the session. Feel free to contact me if you have any other questions. The coordinates have already been shared with everybody. So feel free to connect with me subsequently. Thank you guys, and thanks a lot, Richard. Have a good
Thank you.
evening or a
Thank you
good
very
afternoon.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Can I just say thank you to Rajesh for organising, and thank you to you guys for attending. I just hope I haven't bored you too much with contracts. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, bye-bye.